Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a world of clay tablets, incense-scented alleys, and bedtime routines that include crushed shells and communal spit bowls. That's right. Welcome to ancient Sumer, where nightly oral hygiene wasn't just a habit. It was practically a sacred rite. You're walking the narrow, dusty streets of Ur just as the sun dips behind those ziggurats, and the last shouts of merchants echo to the cooling air. Imagine the scent: warm clay, dried dates, something faintly metallic. You pass a corner shrine flickering with oil lamps, and then home. A simple mud brick dwelling, cool inside, lit only by starlight and a single smoky lamp. No electric switches here, no mini squeeze tubes or ergonomic toothbrushes. Just you, your sore feet, and a ritual involving soot, reeds, and the most committed tooth cleaners this side of the Fertile Crescent. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to tell me your location and the local time, especially if you're brushing your teeth in the dark like some Sumerian throwback. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel beside a low basin, fashioned from fired clay, still warm from the heat of the day. The breeze outside carries the sound of distant lyres and the occasional donkey complaint. A woman, maybe your grandmother, maybe a hired attendant, hands you a thin, polished stick. It's a chew stick, probably trimmed from a Salvadora bush or tamarisk, and its end has been frayed with care. You press it against your teeth and begin the slow, deliberate work of bedtime cleansing. The Sumerians didn't brush as we do. No swirling motions, no electric hum. You chew, you rub, you mix saliva with a dry, chalky powder stored in a soapstone jar. This powder, your toothpaste, is a cocktail of ingredients that today would make a dentist weep. Crushed oyster shell, burnt animal bone, powdered brick, and a trace of ash. Gritty, yes. Tasty? Not even remotely. But effective. In a world where sweets are rare and fiber-rich food is standard, this stuff gets the job done. You feel the scrape, the earthy texture, the slight sting as something alkaline meets a sore gum. That's how you know it's working, right? One mainstream historical fact. The Sumerians were among the first to document medical and hygienic practices in writing. On cuneiform tablets, no less. They recorded prescriptions, advice, and even bedtime regimens like dental care. Not always glamorous, but consistent. A fringe tidbit? Some archaeological evidence suggests families personalized their tooth-cleaning mixtures. A bit of licorice root here, some powdered copper there. One recovered container even had traces of what may have been sesame oil, giving it a faintly nutty aftertaste. Historians still argue whether this personalization was for health benefits or simply to mask the taste of burnt bone. Either way, it adds a certainty in Isaiah's qua to the ritual. And make no mistake, it was a ritual. Tooth cleaning wasn't a hasty affair before bed. It was part of the wind down. You sat with family or close friends, each working through their routine, maybe gossiping, maybe reciting prayers. It was domestic, communal, rhythmic. Now, picture this. A father scraping his molars with a twig while advising his children on the dangers of tooth demons. A grandmother sprinkling charcoal dust into her palm, adding a drop of goat milk, and daubing across her gums with the tip of her finger. They believed it purified the mouth, warded off decay, and kept breath pleasing to the gods. Yes, the gods cared. At least, in Sumerian lore, cleanliness, including oral cleanliness, was linked to purity of spirit. Approaching a temple? Better make sure your mouth didn't smell like dried fish and donkey cart. Some texts even advise reciting prayers during tooth cleaning, as if to sanctify the act. You can imagine how hard it would be to mumble a hymn while scraping your tongue with a stick. But they managed. The chew sticks themselves weren't disposable, either. After use, they were rinsed, dried, and stored, often in intricately carved holders. In wealthier homes, a servant might clean your stick for you. In poorer households, sticks were sometimes shared. You try not to dwell on that detail too long. Another odd note. They didn't clean at night instead of the morning. They did both. Nighttime cleaning was considered the more social and significant of the two, perhaps because it marked the transition from the visible world into the dream realm. You didn't want to greet your ancestors with dirty molars. After all, and just when you think this can't get any more surprisingly specific, there's evidence that some homes had small niches in the wall near the sleeping area, just big enough to hold a water bowl, a cloth, and yes, the family's chew sticks, an ancient bathroom shelf. You resist the urge to giggle, but it's oddly familiar. As the final embers in the hearth cool and your teeth, now oddly chalky and fresh, settle into your mouth, you roll over onto a woven mat. Outside, the wind shifts, rustling the reeds along the canal. A low, guttural chant echoes from the temple in the distance, and you close your eyes knowing your breath is, if not pleasant, then at least historically approved. Sleep comes slowly in Sumer. The stars don't twinkle so much as burn, large, constant, and deeply quiet. Somewhere in your dream, a clay tablet is being pressed with a reed stylus. Perhaps it's a recipe for toothpaste. Perhaps it's a complaint about how it tastes. Either way, it's part of the ritual now. The sun returns to the rooftops of UR with a slow, determined glow, filtering to the reed mat that serves as your window shade. You stretch on your mat, jaw slightly sore from last night's shell grit scrub. Morning in Sumer is a clatter of sandals on packed earth, goats bleating as they're led to pasture, and someone already hawking onions in the street. And yes, before you ask, morning dental hygiene is very much a thing. You kneel again at that same basin, rinse your mouth with warm water from a terracotta jar, and start the chew stick ritual all over again. It's less social this time, more efficient. Your grandmother's still asleep, and even the temple bells haven't started. But there's a sense of duty in it. You're brushing not for vanity, but for balance. The Sumerians had a word for this balance, me. It meant the fundamental laws of the universe, granted by the gods and observed in everyday acts. Eating, sleeping, worship, and yes, oral care. To neglect it was to risk disharmony. A chipped tooth wasn't just inconvenient. It could be seen as an imbalance in your inner me. Mainstream historians note that Sumerians were likely among the first to link dental pain to spiritual impurity. That annoying molar ache could be because you failed to honor the goddess Ninkarak, who, among other responsibilities, was in charge of healing and health. A mouth out of balance could attract diseased demons, who supposedly crept in through unclean gaps between your teeth. Naturally, people became quite diligent with their powder bone routines. Fringe tidbit for your sleepy consideration. One text from Lagash suggests that some families held weekly tooth-warding chants where the youngest child had to recite a poem, while each family member took turns flicking oil onto their teeth using date fronds. A weird mix of oral hygiene and competitive performance art. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine preventative practice, or just a bizarre game that got out of hand. Meanwhile, in temple schools, young scribes were taught to keep their teeth sharp like reeds and clean like new clay. Imagine sitting for hours scratching glyphs into wax tablets, only to be sent home with a warning to brush better. It wasn't about appearance. Not really. Your breath carried your words, and your words were divine. And so begins the curious overlap between hygiene and communication in ancient Sumer. Clean mouths equal clear prayers. There are even prayer scrolls that begin with the equivalent of, with cleansed mouth and sweetened breath, I call to thee. You weren't just brushing off plaque. You were polishing your soul's megaphone. Let's talk about the taste, though. No matter how many bits of copper or soot you added to your blend, most early tooth powders were aggressively gritty. You'd taste brick dust for hours. Some herbal additions like thyme or myrrh helped a bit, but in general, there wasn't much hope of walking away with a minty fresh feeling. The closest was maybe juniper ash, which left a sort of smoky tingle, kind of like brushing with burnt forest. But this is also when the first real distinctions start appearing between hygiene for health and hygiene for status. Wealthier citizens began storing their tooth powders in carved stone boxes, often with animal motifs, lions, ibex, even oddly cheerful turtles. The fancier the box, the more people assumed you must be clean and well-connected. One temple official had a chew stick case made of lapis lazuli, etched with a warning, "May those who borrow without return lose their front teeth." You chuckle. Toothbrush theft is apparently eternal. It's worth noting that by 2500 BCE, some tooth cleaning tools were even left in burial sites. That's how important they were. People took their chew sticks into the afterlife. Some archaeologists believe this wasn't just sentimental, it might have been practical. A clean mouth in death ensured your spirit could speak clearly to the judges of the underworld. No one wants to be eternally misheard because they skipped a scrub. And now, the Sumerians, always inventors, start experimenting. Someone, probably a bored temple herbalist, adds a pinch of crushed anise seed to the tooth powder and discovers it masks the smell of fish breath remarkably well. Someone else tries soaking the chew stick in beer overnight for a softening effect. It doesn't work, and the smell is unfortunate. Others experiment with clove oil, a rarity from distant lands, which numbs the gums slightly, a primitive analgesic, tucked into a bedtime routine. The rituals evolve slowly, shifting with trade, conquest, and seasonal herbs. New ingredients appear from the Indus Valley, from Egypt, from Anatolia, and with them come new fears. What if this foreign powder offends the gods? What if it's cursed? Some families burn their imported paste in tiny pots just to check if the smoke rises evenly, a sign it's safe to use. This caution extends to children. You're not allowed to brush unattended until you're about 7. Until then, someone brushes your teeth for you, usually a parent or older sibling, though in some wealthier homes. The task falls to a designated oral servant. Not a glamorous title, but a respected one. These specialists were responsible for mixing powders, inspecting teeth, even massaging the gums with reeds soaked in honey. Honey? Yes, that's another innovation. Not for cleaning, but for post-cleaning. A final swipe across the teeth to seal the blessing, as one priest puts it. Historians still debate whether this practice helped or hurt long-term dental health. It probably did both. As the morning brightens and the sounds of the city grow louder, you finish your chew stick routine and rinse with water that's just starting to go warm in the sun. You feel refreshed. Slightly scratched, but refreshed. You nod to your reflection in the polished bronze mirror. Teeth mostly intact, breath less offensive, balance restored. Somewhere outside, a temple bell rings. It's time for work, worship, or perhaps just another slow walk down the dusty street. You tuck your chew stick behind your belt, where it stays tucked all day like a polite little weapon of cleanliness. And you wonder, idly, how many other people are walking around Sumer right now with bits of burnt bone stuck in their teeth. You pass the threshold of the clay brick doorway into the crisp shade of the family courtyard. Chickens wander between potted barley plants, and somewhere nearby, someone is grinding grain with a sound like muffled thunder. Another day begins in the bustling heart of UR, and your teeth, miraculously, are still attached. Small victories. At the center of the courtyard is your family's hygiene station. It's not fancy, just a flat stone slab with a shallow groove. But here's where the real innovations start to appear. Sumerians didn't just brush, they prepped too. You notice your uncle crouching there now, mixing his personal batch of powder in a little bowl carved from bitumen stone. You peek over his shoulder, crushed pumice, thyme ash, and wait, is that lapis dust? Show off. This morning, though, he's muttering a charm. Something rhythmic, almost musical. Sumerian oral hygiene wasn't just physical, it was ritual. You weren't supposed to begin without invoking the proper words, especially if you had a meeting or temple visit ahead. A clean mouth was a purified channel for your thoughts, and no one wanted to offend a god with bad breath. If that sounds extreme, remember this. They also purified doors, floors, and even beer jars with the same level of care. Mainstream archaeologists agree that Sumerians treated the mouth as a sacred site. It was where language was born, language which they believed was a gift from the god Enki himself. So, tending your teeth was like sweeping the entryway to a shrine. It's not just about avoiding cavities, though those did happen, but about dignity, holiness, and public image. And here's your fringe tidbit. A preserved letter from an apprentice priest to his mentor, discovered on a cracked clay tablet, includes the line, "I arrived with clean mouth and feet, so the heavens might not recoil." Historians still argue whether this was poetic tradition or a passive-aggressive reminder that someone in the temple really needed to floss. Speaking of floss, did they? Not exactly, but close. In some upper-class homes, they used finely split-date palm fibers to thread between teeth especially before big meals. It wasn't always necessary. Their diets were less sugar-heavy than ours, but grain husks and meat fibers did get lodged. One mural in a merchant's home even shows two figures helping each other dig something from a tooth using what looks suspiciously like a bronze needle. Friendship in its purest form. But with new tools came new anxieties. You can feel in the way people talk about hygiene. There's pride, sure, but also a flicker of fear. Did you brush enough? Did you use the right oil? What if your breath was off and someone whispered about it during temple offerings? So the Sumerians turned to insurance policies. Charms. They weren't just for the sick or the unlucky. Some people kept tiny fist-sized clay amulets near their dental bowls. Little figures with bulging cheeks and toothy grins, said to ward off decayed demons. One charm, shaped like a frog with a sandal in its mouth, don't ask, was meant to devour the rot before it devours you. Charming. The logic was, if something went wrong with your teeth, pain, swelling, even minor bleeding, it had to be the work of evil spirits. Not bacteria, which wouldn't be discovered for several millennia, but malevolent beings that loved warm, dark, and slightly damp real estate. Your mouth, essentially, was prime demonic property. And so the rituals began evolving. Some families incorporated incense before brushing, waving smoke around their heads while muttering lines from the exorcism of the sick mouth, a real clay tablet found in Sapar. It includes a deliciously specific line, "Begone, O worm of rot, O whisper of spoil." The word worm might seem odd, but they really believed toothaches were caused by tiny creatures burrowing into the enamel. In fact, some cultures kept this theory going until the 18th century. Now, for the weird part, tooth powder recipes were often kept secret. You'd think it would be something everyone shared freely like bread or gossip. But no, each household had its own guarded blend. Some mixed theirs under cover of night. Some passed it down like treasure. You can picture a wrinkled matriarch whispering, 2 parts chalk, 1 part ash, 1 pinch of bitter melon. Like she's handing you the recipe for immortality. And, in a way, she is. Because what's more enduring than a smile? Historians still debate whether these secret recipes were truly effective or just symbolic bonding tools. Some were probably harmless. Others might have stripped enamel faster than you could say, ow. But the act of making it, sharing it, using it, that mattered. It became identity. Family. The scent of your powder was part of how people remembered you. Even children got in on the game. They were given miniature chew sticks, shorter, softer, often carved with simple animal heads. Not so much because they needed to clean, but because parents wanted to instill habit. And probably, let's be honest, keep them quiet for 5 minutes. This brings us to one of the more fascinating archaeological finds. A Sumerian lullaby fragment that ends with the line, "Now chew your stick and sleep, sweet dust licker." Probably a term of endearment. Probably. Scholars still puzzle over whether this lullaby was literal, metaphorical, or just a mother too tired to come up with a proper rhyme. As the sun begins its climb towards its relentless apex, you sense a shift in the air. The day's pace quickens. Merchants unroll rugs. Bakers haul bread. But for a fleeting moment, you linger by that hygiene station, watching your uncle spit expertly into the corner drain. He pats his lapis box with reverence, like it saved him from divine embarrassment once again. And you realize, amid all this ancient dust and soft morning chatter, that the Sumerians were maybe the first to truly understand that cleaning your teeth wasn't just hygiene. It was hope, a promise to the world that you were still here, still dignified, still sweet-breathed and full of purpose. And maybe, just maybe, still good enough for the gods to listen. Later in the day, the marketplace hums with the rhythm of sandals on sun-warmed stone, and you find yourself browsing clay jars of fragrant herbs and strange powders, some labeled with Sumerian cuneiform signs so old and smudged they look like chicken tracks dancing across clay. The merchant, predictably shirtless and extremely enthusiastic, gestures toward his wares with the kind of flair usually reserved for minor gods. This one, he grins, holding up a pot with a chunk of amber-colored resin inside. Guaranteed to cure morning stink mouth. Swear by it. My cousin uses it, and she's married now. You don't ask whether those things are related, but it's a reminder. Even in UR's heyday, Hygiene wasn't just maintenance, it was marketing. Personal cleanliness, especially oral care, became a subtle arms race. If you could afford better smelling breath, you were probably doing well. If your gums looked pink and unbloodied, the mark of a person who could afford imported salt rubs or sun-dried fennel ash. Now, here's the mainstream fact. We have cuneiform records listing ingredients for various tooth powders and mouth rinses, often stored alongside recipes for medicinal balms. And nestled between long lists of barley taxes and goat inventories, you'll find something like 3 pinches of natron, 1 spoon burnt eggshell, pound until powder, apply with wet reed. That's real. There's also one that recommends crushed date pits in honey, spat gently into the east wind, which sounds like a toothpaste of wish spell hybrid. Historians still argue whether these were actual medical instructions or just poetic metaphors. Like bathe your teeth in the sunlight of Ninlil's breath. Try fitting that on a toothpaste tube. By mid-afternoon, you pass through the scribe's quarter, where students lounge on reed mats, copying signs into clay with chewed-on styluses. Yes, chewed. Those hardened writing tools doubled as impromptu teeth scratchers, not unlike how modern students chomp pens during finals. It's here you overhear a debate. 2 scribes in training arguing over whether warm salt rinses or cool fig pulp does more for breath before a festival. They cite different priests, different temple customs, even lunar phases. This isn't just idle chat. It's civic pride, like arguing about your hometown's best pizza place, but with more tooth powder. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some priests taught that chewing cedar bark during the 3rd moon phase of the lunar cycle would bring not only clarity of mind, but fragrance most pleasing to winged beings. Possibly metaphorical angels. Possibly very literal temple doves. Sumerians blurred that line constantly. Let's take a short walk outside the city. Not too far, just to the suburbs, where reed huts and modest homes form a lattice of daily life. These folks couldn't afford lapis lace powders or bronze tools. Their toothpaste came from riverbed chalk and dried mint, chewed together into a fibrous ball and mashed against the teeth. It sounds primitive, but guess what? Some of these folks had better teeth than their wealthier cousins. Why? Less sugar, more fiber, and fewer decorative resin pastes that turned to dental cement after one hot afternoon. Sometimes frugality wins. You spot a father brushing his teeth with a greenish twig, grinning as he teaches his daughter the same. You rub down, not up, he says. Up pulls out the spirit. She giggles. Her stick's too big, and she smacks her nose. At the heart of it all was rhythm, the daily routine. Sumerians weren't brushing like us, quickly, thoughtlessly, with one eye on the clock. No, they were doing it slowly, in time with chants or songs. Think of it like ancient ASMR. Scrape, scrape, hum, pause. You might be cleaning teeth, or you might be praying. The overlap is a point. One old song fragment, likely sung by housewives during brushing, goes something like, "The day burns hot, the grain grows bold. May my mouth not shame my words of gold." Scholars still argue whether this was a hygiene tune or a general housekeeping mantra. Either way, it's catchy. And let's not forget, this wasn't a solo act. Sumerians brushed together, family members, neighbors, even co-workers before long temple shifts. It was social, even intimate. We have reliefs showing pairs of friends grooming each other's hair and inspecting teeth side by side. Imagine standing outside your office building and flossing with co-worker while reciting a cleansing prayer. Awkward today, sure. But back then, it was trust. There's even one account of an elite wedding contract that required the groom provide his bride with fresh paste, cedar floss, and morning water daily for 5 years. Romantic and minty. But let's go weirder. Among the city's artisan class, potters, sculptors, bronze workers, there emerge in niche fashion decorative chew sticks. Some carved with family crests, others painted with tiny goddess eyes. A few even came with built-in tongue scrapers. There's one in a museum that has a quote from a love poem etched along the handle. "Your breath is the oil that wakes the garden." We're not saying it's subtle. We're saying it worked. And if you were really trendy, you use scented oils not just to clean, but to impress. You might show up at a banquet with rose oil tongue swabs or cinnamon breath rinses. meant to linger softly in the air as you spoke. Think of it like an ancient TikTok filter, but for your entire mouth. You pass a home now with a water cistern out front. A servant girl is pouring clean water into a clay bowl, mixing in something that smells vaguely lemony. She dips a cloth in, swirls it, then lifts it to her lips. Not to drink, to rinse. She's preparing for guests. Because in Sumer, hygiene isn't private. It's performance. And it's not just about your own dignity. In this culture, to share a meal meant to share trust, which meant no one wanted to smell the remnants of your breakfast barley cake during a dinner chant. Clean mouth, clean heart. As the sun dips lower and shadows stretch long and deliberate across the stone walls of you sense the shift. Evening rituals will begin soon. Offerings, prayers, but also, somewhere in the side streets, someone's warming a reed stick over the hearth, softening it, curling its tip, getting ready to clean one last time before bed. Because here, in the cradle of civilization, oral hygiene isn't just a task. It's a tether between people, between soul and word, between your breath and the gods. You stay quiet as dusk folds itself neatly into the skyline, like a well-made linen tunic. The light fades from copper to indigo, and the Sumerian city of begins to exhale. The air cools slightly, the clamor softens, and the final rituals of the day begin in earnest, including, yes, the most ancient nightly routine you didn't know you shared before 1,000-year-old civilization, bedtime mouth care. Because while mornings were loud and social and briskly mint-scented, evenings had a softer tempo, slower, more reflective. Think of it as a jazz version of brushing your teeth. Inside a modest home, mud brick walls still warm from the day, you find a mother preparing a nightly paste for her children. No squeeze tubes, no plastic caps lost behind the sink. Just a shallow bowl and a pestle. She crushes fresh thyme with a little myrrh resin and a pinch of dried river salt. A few drops of warm water, and it becomes something halfway between scrub and balm. She hums as she works. You notice the lullaby has a rhythm that matches her stirring. Maybe that's not an accident. The kids take turns using short sticks, each marked with a bit of string to denote ownership. You're reminded, suddenly and sharply, of those color-coded toothbrushes everyone fights over in modern families. Only here, instead of choosing a blue dinosaur or a pink unicorn, you might tie on a tiny bead or a carved-out pattern. It's time for your mainstream fact. Archaeological finds near ancient Sumerian homes have uncovered reed stem tools smooth at one end and sometimes frayed. What researchers believe were early personal hygiene devices used for tooth cleaning, not decoration, not farming, oral care. They were often stored in communal pots, much like you might find a jar of toothbrushes in a shared bathroom today. Just, with more risk of termites. But even more interesting is where these tools were kept, often near the family shrine. That's your fringe tidbit. In several excavations, dental tools have been found alongside devotional objects like household gods and prayer stones. Historians still argue whether this was pure convenience or part of a spiritual hygiene ritual. Clean body, clean spirit, clean dreams. And dreams mattered. Sumerians believed the dream realm was porous, unpredictable, and full of influence from the gods. You didn't just wander into sleep unprepared. You readied yourself. You anointed your head. You cleaned your mouth, because the gods listened through your breath. Imagine falling asleep with the scent of crushed clove and fennel lingering on your tongue, believing that your words, spoken or imagined, might carry further if they traveled on sweet air. Suddenly, that bedtime ritual feels a lot less silly. There's a story you overhear as you rest on a rooftop under a woven mat sky, told by a grandmother whose knees creak like ancient doors. It's about a man who forgot to cleanse his mouth before bed and dreamed of speaking to the goddess Nanshi, only for her to pinch his lips shut. "You speak like a cow's backside," she allegedly said. He woke up with fever and a rash that lasted 3 moons. Did it happen? Probably not. But did generations of children brush more faithfully because of it? Absolutely. Let's pivot now to a particular segment of Sumerian society, the temple caretakers. Not the priests. You'll meet them later, but the people who swept the floors, polished the statuary, and prepared ceremonial spaces. For them, cleanliness was layered, physical and spiritual. They had to be clean in body and breath before they could even light the incense. Some even kept 2 sets of tools, one for ordinary brushing and one reserved for temple days. One recent clay tablet suggests a rule: no tool used for sacred cleansing shall enter the eating room. A bit extreme, but that's the temple life. Now, about those elite households. You'd think they'd have the fanciest brushes, right? And yes, some did. Carved ivory handles, imported bristles, even dab with perfumes. But many noble Sumerians also took pride in their nightly helpers, household attendants whose job was to prepare the paste and offer a small basin of clean rinsed water just before their masters settled into bed. And that's where things get a little ceremonial. The act of being handed your nightly dental balm became, for some, a tiny ritual of status. There's one tablet that records an argument between 2 noble women about who received their rinse bowl first at a dinner party sleepover. This is real. The inscription ends with the host declaring neither shall receive it again, and both a chew plane reads for 3 nights as punishment. And the reeds weren't always fresh, which leads us to one of the oddest fringe practices recorded: moon-roasted sticks. Some families, particularly those with deep ties to old agricultural rites, believe that leaving their chew sticks outside under a full moon and then toasting them briefly over temple fire would imbue them with both cleansing power and celestial blessing. Did it work? Debatable. Was it better than chewing on a random twig from the goat pen? Probably. We've talked about kids, nobles, workers, but let's check in with Sumerian lovers. Yes, love and hygiene go together here too. A common romantic gesture: offering someone your personal paste recipe, like a shared playlist, only Messier. One clay letter from a young scribe to a temple singer reads, "I send you the paste of my own making, sweetened with anise and fire-dried mint. Think of me as your tongue awakens." Historians still argue whether this was an accepted courtship act or just really forward. Either way, the Toothpaste mixtape was born. By the time stars speckle the sky, the city seems hushed. Even the animals have settled. You hear only the soft clink of a clay jar being placed back on a shelf. Somewhere, a final prayer is whispered through freshly rinsed lips. And it's beautiful, isn't it? That in this oldest of cities, beneath towers of baked brick and beside canals rippling under moonlight, people still care how they felt before sleep, how they tasted, how they smelled, not for vanity, for honor, for connection, for dreams. You roll to your side on the rooftop mat, eyes just beginning to close. Somewhere, someone is still spitting out their final rinse. Someone else tucks away their chew stick. Tomorrow it all starts again. But for now, your breath is sweet. Your heart is quiet, and the gods are listening. The city of UR is quieter now. Only the occasional night bird or the rustle of palm fronds stirs the warm dark. The rooftops are still. The temples glow faintly, their fire bowls dim to soft embers. And somewhere below, tucked in the courtyard of a modest merchant's house, a little clay pot sits in a niche, half filled with a gritty, herbal-smelling mixture. This isn't for brushing. Not tonight. This is for chewing. Because while modern bedtime routines tend to end with a rinse, a spit, and a scroll through social media, in Sumerian times, many people close out their evening hygiene with a final chew, a practice meant not only to clean, but to scent the breath for the journey into sleep. It's a ritual halfway between brushing and aromatherapy, and you're about to experience it. Take a sliver of licorice root, a dab of honey resin, maybe a sprinkle of powdered coriander seed. Press into a ball, wrapped in fig skin and chewed slowly, not swallowed, not hurried. This is sleep chewing. The Sumerians called it Nisig too, literally rest scent. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Multiple cuneiform tablets from the 3rd millennium BC list bedtime chewables among the inventory of household remedies, separate from food or medicine. These weren't snacks. They were functionally hygienic. Think of them as the prequel to the breath mint. One particularly well-preserved tablet even details the proportions. 2 seeds anise, 3 seeds fennel paste of pomegranate bark, wrapped in pressed leaf. It was believed to calm the belly, soothe the throat, and prevent unwholesome night breath, which, let's be honest, is still a problem. But here's your fringe tidbit. Some bedtime chewables were designed to influence dreams. These weren't just about fresh breath. They were thought to tune your senses toward specific gods. Want to receive a dream from Enki, god of wisdom? Chew wormwood and cardamom. Hoping to avoid nightmares? Myrrh and dried apple skin. Sleepwalking? You guessed it, sour barley and mashed fig sap, the ancient equivalent of don't eat cheese before bed. Historians still argue whether these mixtures had any pharmacological effects or the influence was purely placebo plus spiritual expectation. Either way, it shows how incredibly seriously the Sumerians took the boundary between waking and sleeping. And then there's the noise. See, one unexpected side effect of chewing roots, barks, and dried herbs before sleep is that it makes noise. Light popping, crunching, squishy gum-like smacks, which, in a household of thin walls and shared sleeping spaces, could get a bit awkward. So some homes introduced a chewing curtain. Yes, a literal curtain, made of layered linen, usually hung from a pole in the corner of the sleeping area. Whoever had chew duty, typically elders or those with lingering coughs, would go behind a curtain and complete their routine in muffled privacy. Because nothing says romance like, "Excuse me, I must now smush this licorice bark against my molars for 10 minutes." Speaking of romance, there was another function to these chewables. They were a kind of nonverbal message. Imagine a couple lying side by side on a reed mat. One reaches for the fennel mint blend. The other rolls their eyes, knowing full well what that flavor signals. Yes, in some circles, the choice of bedtime paste or chew was a subtle hint. I'm open to intimacy, or please, for the love of the moon goddess, not tonight. Tablets from the city of Lagash contain coded recipes described as stirring blends. One rather cheeky one reads, "For the warming of the mouth and the melting of reserve, 2 roots of sweet fire, seed of sunflower, and bark of willow." Whether it actually worked or not is up for debate, but the placebo effect has a long and powerful legacy. Now, let's step into the world of Sumerian innkeepers. If you were traveling, say, to attend a grain exchange or visit your cousin's awkward second wedding, you'd stay at a small guest house or communal inn. These places didn't just offer food and shelter. They often provided a complimentary hygiene station. Yes, the original mini-hotel amenities. Clay trays held tiny paste and chewable bundles, often wrapped in dyed reed to signal freshness. Guests could select one, use it before sleep, and place the remnants in a special disposal jar. Some inns even had a mouth servant, a child apprentice whose job was to keep the hygiene corner tidy and offer guests the chewable of the house. This was seen as a sign of prestige. One guest tablet from a traveler in the poor complains that they provided only one flavor, with bitter seeds, and declares the night was thus joyless. But even this wasn't universal. In the countryside, many homes relied on herbal steams rather than pastes. Before bed, family members would gather over a shallow bowl of hot water, infused with lavender, juniper, or crushed date leaves. They'd inhale together, mouths open, eyes closed. It was part relaxation, part social bonding, part mosquito repellent. And it wasn't just for humans. Here's something bizarre but real. Some wealthier households prepared diluted versions of these herbal steams for their dogs. Not cats. Cats were wild and self-cleaning. But dogs? Dogs were invited to sit calmly while steam rose around them, perhaps in hopes that their panting wouldn't wake the neighbors. A tablet fragment from the city of Eridu even mentions a household hound who breathes herbs and does not bark at stars, which raises more questions than it answers. By the time these rituals wrap up, the stars have brightened above the Sumerian plain. The chewing has ended. The steams have cooled, and the little mouth-cleaning tools are set gently into their pots. Not sterilized, of course. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But rinsed. Maybe. Possibly wiped on someone's tunic. One more glance around. The merchants are asleep, their jaws freshly clove-scented. The children, curled on mats, clutching reed dolls, exhale sweet air. And high above in a ziggurat chamber, a priest dreams of deciphering omens. With teeth that would pass any godly inspection, you shift slightly under your woven blanket, mimicking the gentle chew of fennel and mint. It's not bad, actually. You can almost taste it. And if a dream god visits you tonight, well, your breath is ready. You're still in the heart of the Sumerian night, but the mood is shifting. The courtyard breeze carries a scent of something richer now. Not resin or mint, but clay, warm water, and something smoky. Because while personal toothpaste rituals were intimate and aromatic, public hygiene in Sumer had its own theater, especially in the bathhouses. Yes, bathhouses. You're probably picturing Roman marble and awkward togas, but the Sumerian version was a little more rustic. Think mud brick walls, reed-matted floors, and communal tubs that look suspiciously like oversized soup bowls. But what they lacked in polish, they made up for in ritual. And oral hygiene was part of that package. Mainstream fact time. In many Sumerian cities, Eridu and Lagash among them, there were public bathing and purification sites connected to temples or community centers. People didn't just go there to scrub off dust. These were spiritual cleansing hubs. Physical cleanliness was seen as a prerequisite for moral or ritual purity. You didn't approach a temple smelling like last night's onions. And at the far end of many of these sites, the basin table. Long slabs of sun-dried clay, with shallow bowls carved into their surface. Each bowl held a different mixture. Scrubbing paste, scented oil, grain rinse, and yes, something resembling toothpaste. Only you didn't brush. You smeared. Sumerian paste smearing was part massage, part exfoliation, part spiritual tune-up. You take a pinch of ashen seed mixture between two fingers, rub it along your gums and lips, maybe even inside of your cheeks. No bristles, no spitting, just a slow, deliberate rub, sometimes performed by an attendant who'd chat with you about the weather or how your dream interpretation went last week. And while that might sound awkward, it was seen as a mark of social grace to engage in hygienic conversation. Gossip was practically expected, which brings us your fringe tidbit. The term sudu, a Sumerian word often translated as cleansing, also had an alternate usage among scribes. It meant to revise, especially in the context of clay tablets. So you cleanse a document the same way you cleanse your mouth, by carefully reworking it to remove impurities. Historians still argue whether this double usage was coincidence or a sign of deeper symbolic thinking. Was a clean mouth seen as a metaphor for truthful speech? Some texts suggest so. One poem describes a high priest, whose lips are clean like clay yet untouched by stylists. Honestly, that sounds like someone who's both hygienic and very quiet. Meanwhile, in the merchant quarters, this oral hygiene theater took on another role: commerce. You step into a small stall at the market's edge. Shelves are lined with narrow jars of dried paste, tied with twine and labeled with cuneiform scribbles that basically translate to things like morning cool or bitter sleep. Each one boasts an ingredient that promises something: fresh breath, soothed dreams, better temple prayers. The vendors, mostly older women with knowing eyes and worn fingers, offer samples on little spatulas made from fish bone. You dab one onto your tongue. It's grainy, it burns a little, and for some reason, it makes your ears feel cooler. That's the coriander talking. These pastes were sold like artisan goods, hand-prepared, sun-dried, mixed in small batches. Sumerians didn't think of toothpaste as boring. They thought of it the way we think of cologne, coffee blends, or boutique teas, full of promise, flavor, and deeply personal preference. And this is where it gets weirdly competitive. In some families, the head of household would choose the family paste, but others allowed each member their own, an early expression of individuality in a culture otherwise steeped in communal ritual. Kids had sweeter blends. Elders had more medicinal ones. Teenagers? Well, teenagers were offered blends with names like Silent Spirit and Calm Fire, which sounds suspiciously like a polite way of saying, please stop talking and go to bed. Back at the bathhouse, you watch as one man completes his pace ritual and raises his arms in silent thanks to Gula, the goddess of healing. He then spits, very precisely, into a small clay funnel set into the floor. It drains into a trench that runs along the perimeter of the room. These weren't drains as we know them, but more like sacrificial runnels. It was considered respectful to return used substances to the earth or to the water gods. So yes, even your spit had sacred overtones. Now, here's a curious footnote. Archaeologists once uncovered a sealed jar in the ruins of Uruk, labeled with a phrase meaning mouth vessel for the honored dead. When opened, it contained a dried paste blend that, under analysis, included powdered pearl, date resin, and ground olive pit. Historians still argue whether this was a symbolic item, like grave incense, or a genuine effort to provide the deceased with fresh breath in the afterlife. Either way, that's dedication. And as the bathhouse clears out, you begin to notice the layering of scents in the warm air. Not just soap and oil, but cumin and dried mint, aged clay and fig ash. It smells kind of wonderful, like someone lit a candle inside a spice jar. It's calming. It slows your thoughts. You walk past the final basin. A child is rubbing his gums with what looks like a cloth tied around a twig, an early version of the meswak stick. Perhaps his mother watches approvingly, humming a temple tune. It's bedtime. Your feet crunch over the reed mat as you step outside into the warm, moon-washed street. Mouth clean, body soothed. Your dreams feel nearer. Somehow, you wonder if you should have bought that silent spirit paste after all. And just before you head home, you see it. A small inscription carved into the side of the bathhouse wall, weathered but legible. Mouth pure, sleep deep. A motto for the ages. You follow that quiet little motto, mouth pure, sleep deep, as you pad softly back to the moonlit lanes of UR. The air is drowsy. The chatter of the evening market has faded, and the rhythmic murmur of reed fronds brushing against clay walls fills the silence. But there's one last stop to make before bed. The family altar. Yes, believe it or not, oral hygiene in Sumer didn't end with rinsing and smearing. For many households, it concluded with a brief moment of, well, dental prayer. You probably didn't expect toothpaste to intersect with divinity. But hey, that's why this is boring history for sleep. So, picture this. You step into the central room of a modest home. There's a small hearth still warm from cooking, and beside it, a low shelf crowded with small statues, gods and goddesses carved from stone and ivory, each one faintly smiling. There's Enki, god of fresh water, whose domains included cleanliness. And Gula, of course, healing goddess extraordinaire, probably exhausted from hearing everyone's dental woes for centuries. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. The Sumerians, unlike many later civilizations, had no formal clergy class for most everyday rituals. Many spiritual activities were performed at home by the family, and that included cleanliness rites, especially those linked to the body. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about harmony. You kept yourself clean as a sign that your household respected the God's order. So, after you'd done your smearing, rinsing, and oiling, you might light a sliver of sweet resin and offer a whispered phrase like, "Let my mouth carry truth to the dream." It sounds like poetry now, but it was just bedtime protocol then. Your fringe tidbit for this section? Some clay tablets suggest that children were taught tooth odes, simple rhymes or phrases they'd say at the altar while patting their cheeks or tapping their molars. One reconstructed line goes something like, "Gula sees my pearly stone, may no worm make it his home." Slightly terrifying, but catchy. Now, it wouldn't be a Sumerian ritual without a household twist. Because while some families were devout in their little oral hygiene via divinity moments, others got creative. One recovered text from the poor records a wife scolding her husband for skipping the night blessing and instead offering his used toothcloth as an offering of labor. The line reads loosely, "You insult the gods with spit and call it reverence. Shame." He sounds fun at parties. Historians still argue whether these rituals were taken seriously by everyone or were often just habit, performed for tradition's sake more than piety. But either way, it mattered. In fact, during one excavation, archaeologists uncovered a miniature shrine beneath the floor of a typical home that had a burned spot where aromatic seeds, possibly fennel or juniper, had been offered nightly. The shrine also contained a tiny ceramic vessel labeled for the bitter tongue, a family remedy, or perhaps a warning. The bitter tongue, by the way, wasn't just a metaphor. It was believed that certain spirits entered through the mouth, particularly during sleep. So, a clean mouth didn't just earn you social approval. It was spiritual armor. You don't want to let a cranky nether god sneak in between molars while you're dreaming of barley cakes. And if you're thinking, surely this was mostly for adults, you're wrong. Children's routines were heavily emphasized. Before bed, Kids were encouraged to rub their gums, sniff herbs, and smile to the gods, a phrase recorded on a tablet from Lagash. That smile, according to some translators, was supposed to scare away bad dreams. Because nothing frightens an underworld demon more than an aggressively mini 5-year-old grinning into the void. You settle onto a cushion mat near the fire and stretch. Someone places a woven cloth over your legs. A parent figure hums softly while packing away the cleansing tools. The paste jar is sealed. The oil lamp is dimmed. Then comes a moment of stillness. Not quite sleep. Not quite wakefulness. That beautiful in-between time when the brain is finally free to file memories away like worn scrolls in a dusty library. You feel the day's weight ease off your shoulders. Even your jaw, relaxed from all that smearing, slackens in thanks. But before you drift off completely, here comes one more detail, because of course there's always one more. Some elite homes included a tiny breath chamber near the sleeping quarters. It wasn't a real room, more like a niche lined with incense and dried leaves, where people could briefly breathe in a calming scent before bed. The idea was that the last thing to touch your breath before sleep should be sacred, pure, and plant-based. It's like a Neolithic essential oil diffuser. Without the influencer marketing, you try it now. Step into the tiny space. Close your eyes. Inhale. The air is warm with myrrh, coriander, and something like burnt honey. Your lungs ease. Your tongue rests gently behind your teeth. And, perhaps for the first time, you understand why the Sumerians put so much care into the simple, soothing act of cleansing their mouths before bed. It wasn't just about health. It was about presence. Ritual. Savoring the transition from day to night. From conversation to silence. From movement to dream. You turn slowly, padded feet carrying you back to your mat. The altar flickers behind you, the resin nearly gone. You lie down. Someone drapes another cloth across your shoulders. Your eyes drift closed. And if your teeth gleam a little in the moonlight, well, Gula approves. You awake to a soft dawn light filtering through reed mats and a thin veil of dust particles dancing in the air. It's the beginning of another day in the cradle of civilization, where the invention of the nightly toothpaste ritual has quietly shaped daily life. But the story doesn't stop with just cleanliness and piety. There's another fascinating twist that often slips through the cracks of history, the social dance surrounding these dental habits. You trudge outside your humble home, the mud brick walls glowing amber in the morning sun. The market is already stirring, filled with the calls of vendors and the shuffle of sandals on packed earth. But here's the thing. Personal hygiene in Sumer was never just a private affair. It was also a marker of status and respectability. Mainstream fact time. Archaeological digs in UR and Uruk show that the quality and ingredients of toothpaste-like pastes varied greatly by class. While wealthier families use exotic minerals, crushed shells, and fragrant herbs like myrrh and frankincense, common folk often relied on simpler abrasives, mud, ash, or crushed barley grains. It's like ancient dental elitism, the precursor to boutique toothpaste brands and influencer endorsements. The quirky bit? Some scholars have uncovered evidence that certain Sumerians actually used small toothpicks carved from bones or reeds as part of their nightly rituals. These were sometimes decorated with tiny figures, maybe little lions or bulls. Imagine fidgeting with a toothpick. That's also a miniature work of art. Historians still argue whether these serve more practical functions or doubled as status symbols, showing off wealth even in the minutiae of oral care. In the bustling bazaar, you overhear a merchant boasting about a new tooth-purifying oil, a concoction promising to whiten teeth and freshen breath for an entire week with a single application. Sounds familiar, right? The sales pitch apparently included dramatic demonstrations. Think of a Sumerian version of a modern infomercial, complete with eager customers crowding around, some skeptical, some hopeful. The evidence? A fragmentary inscription from a merchant's ledger listing unusual orders for purifying oil in large quantities. And yet, the social rituals surrounding these products reveal more than just hygiene. They hint at a complex web of expectations, anxieties, and performances. For instance, the appearance of your teeth could influence how others perceive your honesty, your reliability, even your moral standing. It's not just about dental health. It's about projecting an image of order and self-control, virtues prized in Sumerian society. One intriguing fringe theory suggests that because of the close link between speech and the mouth, maintaining oral cleanliness was believed to protect one's words and promises. A clean mouth meant a truthful mouth. Historians still debate whether this belief was widespread or mostly poetic symbolism, but adds a fascinating layer to the nightly ritual. Meanwhile, in some households, oral hygiene tools were carefully passed down as heirlooms. Toothpaste jars inscribed with family names, toothpicks wrapped in linen, and small alabaster containers for oils, all cherished and preserved. It was as much about heritage as health. Imagine handling a centuries-old toothbrush and thinking, this little stick connected me to generations of ancestors who cared deeply about their smiles. Yet not everyone was enthusiastic about these rituals. Some Sumerian texts reveal grumbling complaints, mostly from children and servants, about the time-consuming nature of the nightly toothpaste application. One ancient tablet even includes a playful poem mocking a child who tried to sneak to bed without brushing, with lines roughly translating to, "A night without cleansing is a night of shadows on the tongue." You can almost hear that child's sulky footsteps, trailing behind a more diligent sibling, toothbrush in hand. It's a universal story, spanning millennia. As you stroll past a well, you spot a group of elders gathered under a fig tree. They're exchanging recipes for homemade toothpaste, debating the merits of crushed mint versus pounded walnut shells. Their laughter is low, rhythmic, a soothing backdrop to the morning bustle. You pause and listen, catching fragments of advice passed down like oral history itself. It's clear that this nightly ritual is more than just a chore. It was a thread weaving families and communities together, binding generations with the shared goal of clean teeth and good dreams. The sun climbs higher, casting long shadows on the mud bricks. You tuck a small jar of paste into your satchel, ready to begin another day, knowing that tonight, like every night, you'll take part in a tradition that started long ago beneath the stars and between the walls of ancient homes. And maybe, just maybe, when you smile later that night, you'll be honoring those first sleepy brushes of you are and their carefully kept secrets. You settle back, and as dusk descends again, the sky over the Fertile Crescent shifting from dusty rose to a deep indigo. Tonight, the toothpaste ritual feels almost sacred, an intimate pause that both connects and separates you from the clamor of daily life. But beyond the household, the story of these ancient dental customs unfolds into something far more public, even political. Imagine the city gates closing, the bustling streets growing quiet, and the council chamber lighting its lamps. This is where matters of state and society mix with personal habits in unexpected ways. You see, the cleanliness of teeth wasn't just a family affair. It was a matter of civic pride. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Sumerian law codes, such as the Code of Ur-Nemu, included regulations on public sanitation and personal cleanliness, reflecting the belief that purity was tied to justice and order. While the codes don't explicitly mention toothpaste, the underlying principle was clear. Cleanliness was part of a well-run society. Now, for a quirky fringe detail, there's speculation among some archaeologists that certain public buildings featured communal dental stations, where citizens could access cleansing paste or oils before official ceremonies or gatherings. One partially excavated temple near Lagash reveals small alcoves with residues of fragrant substances, which some interpret as ancient public tooth care spots. Historians still argue whether these were truly for dental use or part of broader purification rituals. In any case, the symbolism of a clean mouth extended beyond mere hygiene. A leader with poor breath or stained teeth could be seen as morally lax, even unfit to govern. The stakes were high. Your smile wasn't just personal. It was political theater. This intertwining of cleanliness and power is fascinating. The same way that Roman senators' garden gnomes symbolized status and taste, Sumerian toothpaste rituals were a quiet but potent display of discipline and virtue. Oral hygiene became an extension of the social contract, a sign that you respected your role and responsibilities. Meanwhile, artisans and merchants capitalized on this cultural emphasis. Elaborate containers for tooth powders and oils were crafted from materials like lapis lazuli and gold leaf, designed to impress visitors and indicate wealth. Some even bore inscriptions invoking protection and health. blurring the line between luxury item and talisman. And just when you thought it couldn't get more intricate, some families employed toothpaste scribes, specialized artisans who created custom blends for individual needs or occasions. These blends could be soothing, invigorating, or even ceremonial, tailored with unique scents and textures. It's the ancient equivalent of personalized skincare regimes or bespoke colognes. There's an amusing anecdote tucked away in one tablet, where a scribe boasts about concocting a paste that turns the breath sweet enough to tame even the fiercest lion. Whether this was bravado or truth, it shows how seriously these preparations were taken. You lean back against a cool mud wall, the scent of crushed herbs lingering faintly in the air. The city's rhythm slows, punctuated by the distant call to prayer and the occasional clang of a gate closing. You can't help but wonder, when you brush your teeth tonight, are you really just cleaning? Or are you stepping into a ritual as old as civilization itself? One that ties you to ancient marketplaces, family altars, and city halls filled with whispered promises and well-polished smiles? Night deepens, and as you prepare for bed, the intimate ritual of toothpaste application resumes its quiet dominion. But here's a curious twist. The Sumerians weren't just concerned with cleanliness and social order. They also imbued their nightly brushing with a touch of magic and protection. You brush gently, feeling the gritty paste against your teeth, the faint tingle of crushed herbs lingering on your tongue. It's more than a physical cleanse. It's a spiritual one. The mouth was seen as a vulnerable gateway, susceptible not only to decay, but to evil spirits and misfortune. This belief shaped how toothpaste was made, applied, and even was allowed to handle it. A solid historical fact. Sumerian incantations often accompanied daily routines, including cleansing rituals. Tablets have been found with spells calling on deities like Ninhursag and Enki to protect the body and ward off disease. Some households even kept small amulets near their toothpaste jars, inscribed with prayers for health. The quirky bit? Some paste included ingredients with symbolic power, rather than just practical use. For example, bitumen, a tar-like substance, was sometimes added, not because it cleaned teeth, but because it was believed to trap and expel demons lurking in the mouth. You could say it was the ancient version of a supernatural mouthwash. Historians still argue whether these ingredients had actual antiseptic properties or served purely ritualistic purposes. These beliefs created fascinating social dynamics. Not everyone was permitted to prepare the paste or participate fully in the ritual. Priests and elder women often held exclusive knowledge of the secret recipes, guarding them closely as part of their spiritual authority. In some cases, younger family members were only allowed to observe until they reached a certain age or status. Imagine a young Sumerian girl watching her mother mix the paste with reverence, knowing that one day she'll be entrusted with the sacred task. The ceremony itself could last several minutes, a slow, deliberate process combining cleanliness, prayer, and mindfulness. The connection between hygiene and spirituality wasn't unique to Sumer, but the Sumerians' emphasis on oral care as a protective act stands out. In other cultures, cleansing rituals often focus on the body or face, but the mouth had a special status, a threshold between the inner self and the outside world. There are also tantalizing hints that the toothpaste ritual was linked to dreams and sleep. Some texts mention applying night oils after brushing, designed to soothe the mind and keep nightmares at bay. Whether these were fragrant lavender-like herbs or just calming anointing oils, the intent was clear, to ensure restful sleep and spiritual safety. It's a poetic thought. The simple act of cleaning your teeth becomes a nightly shield, a soft barrier against both physical and metaphysical decay. The gritty paste in your hand is more than mud and crushed shells. It's centuries of belief, care, and protection rolled into one. As the night deepens, you set your brush aside, feeling the comforting weight of tradition settle around you. Tomorrow, the ritual will begin anew, a steady rhythm linking past and present, body and soul. And with that, your eyelids grow heavy, the hum of the ancient city fading softly into dreams.